Welcome to the digital reconstruction of Olympia. Step back in time to 200 BC to learn about the most important ancient sanctuary of the gods. For 1,000 years, Olympia was one of the most important religious sanctuaries in Greece. Its Olympic Games, a fundamental component of worship to the supreme deity in the ancient Greek pantheon, Zeus. The digital reconstruction on this disc was based on extensive historical and archaeological research, making it as accurate in detail as is possible. This disc also contains extensive essays to support a full exploration of the history of the ancient Olympic Games, which may be printed from your computer.
We're visiting the site as it was in about 200 BC, the year of the 145th Olympiad. We've come in March at springtime. This is to avoid the August crowds, 40,000 people with their donkeys, as well as pickpockets, drunks and flies. Spectators and competitors faced many difficulties, as well as expenses, to get to the festival. Attendance was restricted, as married women were banned from the entire area for the duration of the Games. After training and contesting preliminary heats in Elis for a month at the state gymnasiums, the athletes, along with their trainers, festival officials and city ambassadors, walked to Olympia over 2 days. They arrived here to begin the 5-day festival in honour of Zeus the Olympian, after whom the site was named. Passing through the South Stoa, which is a kind of reception hall built in around 350 BC, the procession moved towards the sacred area of the site. Over on the right is the Hippodrome, where all the chariot and horse races took place. If you like, you can have a look at a panorama of the site today from this point. We come to the Boulaterion, or Council House. Here on the first day, athletes swore before a statue of Zeus that they had completed the official training and would not cheat during competition. The judges vowed to be fair and unbiased. Trainers and the guardians of boy competitors also swore to obey the rules of the contests. The central sacred area of Olympia was called the Altis, and it contained temples, altars, dedicatory statues and inscriptions. Up high on your left, you can see the famous Nike, or victory. This statue was commissioned to celebrate the victory by the Messenians over Sparta. Paionios, its sculptor, had previously won a competition to make other statues for the roof of the Temple of Zeus, which shows how deeply the spirit of competition, or agone, was embedded in Hellenic life. The building of the Temple of Zeus began in around 470 BC, and it was funded by booty seized by the city of Elis when its army defeated the nearby rival city of Pisa. This east pediment shows part of the myth of the race between Pelops and Oinomaos, king of Pisa. The prize for the race was Hippodamia, the king's daughter, but if Pelops lost, he, like all her previous suitors, would be killed. Pelops and Hippodamia bribed her father's charioteer to make an axle of wax for the king's chariot. In the course of the race, the chariot crashed and Oinomaos was killed. Have a look around the ruined Altis. We see before us the gigantic ivory and gold statue of Zeus made by the sculptor Pheidias in about 435 BC. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world. It was said by writers of the time that Pheidias, in sculpting this statue, had enhanced people's understanding of religion, and that the statue had the power to bring peace to a troubled soul. You can look around the interior of the temple from here. The statues, shields and other objects that you can see against the walls of the temple are more dedications to Zeus. These precious objects were stored inside the temple for safekeeping. In 374 BC, the temple was badly damaged in an earthquake. All the sculptures fell down and most of the east facade collapsed. New limestone was used to rebuild the structure, and the repaired statues were put back into the pediments. At the earliest Olympics, which are said to have started in 776 BC, all events were held within the Altis. The first running track had its finishing line directly in front of the great altar of Zeus, over to our left. We know that the wrestling bouts were held here because the historian Xenophon tells us that during the Games of 364 BC, the army of Elis attacked the sanctuary, and the wrestling had to be stopped because fighting broke out, with soldiers hurling stones down from the temple roofs at their enemies below. This is the Echo Stoa, where the echoes of voices repeated up to 7 times. The The contests for heralds and trumpeters were held here on the first day of the Games. We're now entering the stadium, which was built in around 450 BC. For over 200 years, competitors and spectators had to climb up onto the terrace or over the bank to reach the track. After the tunnel was built, when each event was announced, the competitors would appear from below the ground as if by magic into the dazzling summer light. The starting blocks at each end ensured that the finishing line for different races was always at the west end of the stadium, as close as possible to the altar of Zeus. The only event at Olympia for the first 50 years was the single-length Stade race. Every Olympics was named after the winner of this 198-metre race. Over time, other races were added to the program: a 2-lap race, a long-distance race of probably 20 laps, and a race in armour. The pentathlon, which involved discus, standing jump, javelin, running and wrestling, took place here. After 350 BC, the independent wrestling, boxing and the pankration were also contested in the stadium. The 10 judges sat in chairs on a tribune on the south bank. The victors of each event were escorted to the judges, who tied a red ribbon onto them to indicate that the contest had been won fairly. The crown-giving ceremony for all victors took place on the last day. There were no prizes for second or third place. In these competitions, it was truly winner-take-all. You can stop for a minute to see what the stadium looks like today. This series of Zeus statues was paid for from the fines on any athletes, trainers, fathers or cities who broke the rules of competition and their sacred oaths. There is a nice view from the Treasury Terrace. Up along this terrace are 11 city treasuries. They were built between 600 and 475 BC. Cities would sometimes make donations in honour of victorious hometown athletes, especially those who won more than once. But owing to the intense rivalries between Greek city-states, it was more likely that shares of war booty and other valuable objects would be deposited in the treasuries as thanksgiving to the gods for successful military and political ventures. This little temple may have been to Aletheia, goddess of childbirth, who was one of the earliest worshipped deities at Olympia, along with Zeus's parents, Kronos and Gaia, and Themis, the goddess of natural law. The objects stored in these small treasury buildings were normally protected from theft by the sanctity of the site. Take a look at the view from the east end of the temple. The earliest known temple at Olympia is this one to the goddess Hera, who was the wife and sister of Zeus. The temple was probably originally dedicated to the divine couple. Women's games at Olympia, which were held at different times to the men's and boys' games, took place in honour of Hera, and they were arranged by the council of 16 wise women of Elis. The temple was built of wood in about 600 BC. Unusually, when the temple was converted to stone, this was done section by section over many centuries, so that all the columns have ended up being slightly different sizes.